Look at the ground beneath your feet. You are standing on a graveyard of empires. For thousands of years, civilizations rose like titans, carved their names in stone, and then they vanished into the dust. We think we are the masters of the world today, but we are merely the latest inhabitants of a house built by ghosts. In this journey, we aren't just looking at dates and dusty maps. We are stepping into the smoke-filled kitchens of Rome. We are standing on the decks of warships fueled by human muscle. We are uncovering secrets that were buried alive for 5 millennia. Why did they build? Why did they fall? And what if the echoes they left behind are actually warnings for us? Over the next 2 hours, the silence of the past will finally speak. Brace yourself. You are about to walk through 5,000 years of human glory, tragedy, and genius. History is no longer a memory. It is happening right now. The world was not born in a day, nor was it born in peace. It was forged in the mud of the riverbanks where the Tigris and Euphrates bled into the Persian Gulf. Imagine a world where the horizon is nothing but golden grass and unpredictable water, where man is a shadow fleeing the lion and the storm. For millennia we were ghosts on the landscape, moving with the seasons, but then something shifted in the spirit of the sapiens. In the land we now call Iraq, the heat is a physical weight, a shimmering veil that distorts the air. Here the first miracle occurred, the taming of the flood. You can see them in your mind's eye, thousands of brown-skinned laborers, their backs glistening with sweat, digging the first trenches. They weren't just moving dirt. They were carving the veins of a new god called civilization. As the water flowed where man commanded, the wild grain bowed its head to the sickle. This is where our story truly begins, in the city of Eridu, the first footprint of urbanity. The air there smelled of roasted barley and damp mud bricks drying in the sun. There was no king yet, only the temple, a rising mountain of clay known as a ziggurat, reaching for Enlil and Enki. People didn't just live here. They belonged to the stone. They traded their freedom for the security of a wall. And what a wall it was! The city of Uruk rose like a titan from the marshes, housing 50,000 souls in a space where once only birds nested. Inside these walls, the first great human tension was born. The claustrophobia of the crowd versus the hunger for progress. You hear the clatter of the first carts, the wooden wheels groaning under the weight of surplus grain. This surplus was the catalyst for everything. It meant not everyone had to hunt. It meant someone could sit in the shade and wonder why the stars moved. It meant someone could take a reed, sharpen it, and press a mark into a wet slab of clay. That first mark, that wedge-shaped cuneiform, was the death of forgetting. No longer would a man's debt or a king's boast die with his breath. It was now etched in the earth, baked hard by the sun, destined to outlast the flesh. As the sun sets on the marshes of Sumer, follow the light westward across the burning Sinai to the Valley of the Happy, the Nile. If Mesopotamia was a struggle against chaotic floods, Egypt was a dance with a predictable god. The Nile was a silver thread sewn into a coat of black silt. Every year, with the precision of a heartbeat, the river rose, and the people did not flee. They waited. They called their land Kemet, the Black Land, and everything beyond it Dishret, the Red Land of Death. To live in Egypt was to live in a loop of eternal return. The transition from scattered tribes to a unified kingdom under Narmer was not just a political act. It was the birth of the first cult of personality. Imagine Narmer, the unifier, standing at the confluence of Upper and Lower Egypt, wearing the skent, the double crown. He wasn't just a leader. He was the bridge between the sun and the soil. The silence of the desert was broken by the rhythmic thud-thud of the mallet against limestone. This was the era of the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders. We often think of these structures as tombs, but to the people of Memphis and Giza, they were horizons. They were machines made of stone designed to launch the soul of the pharaoh into the circumpolar stars, ensuring the universe kept spinning. Thousands of men, fed on onions, bread, and beer, hauled blocks weighing tons, not as slaves, as the popular myth suggests, but as devotees performing a cosmic duty. The sheer scale of the Great Pyramid of Khufu is an assault on the senses. Stand at its base in your imagination. The white Tura limestone casing is so polished it reflects the sun like a second star. It is a mountain of logic in a world of mystery. But beneath the grandeur, there was the heartbeat of the commoner, the woman grinding emmer wheat, the scribe tallying the cattle, the child playing with a wooden crocodile in the shallows of the river. They believed in Ma'at, the concept of balance, truth, and order. If the pharaoh was just and the rituals were kept, the sun would rise, the river would flood, and the world would remain sane. But balance is a fragile thing. As the centuries rolled on, the weight of the pyramids grew too heavy for the economy to bear. The climate shifted, the rains in the Ethiopian highlands failed, and the Great Hunger began. The Old Kingdom didn't end with a war. It ended with a dry river and a broken promise. The statues were toppled, the tombs were looted, and for a moment, the silence of the desert reclaimed the valley. But humanity is a resilient weed. While Egypt fractured into the First Intermediate Period, a new power was stirring in the east, in the Valley of the Industry. Here, in what is now Pakistan and India, the Harappan civilization was achieving something the Nile and Mesopotamia could only dream of: true urban perfection. Unlike the grand palaces of the West, the Indus cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were masterpieces of the middle class. There are no towering cathedrals to kings here. Instead, there are the world's first grid-plan streets. Imagine walking through Mohenjo-Daro in 2500 BCE. The streets are laid out in perfect north-south, east-west axis. Every house, built of standardized fired bricks, has access to a private well and a sophisticated drainage system that rivals anything in Europe until the 19th century. There is a sense of quiet, humming efficiency. In the Great Bath, a massive bitumen-lined pool, the elites likely performed rituals of purification. They were a people of trade, not conquest. Their seals, carved with images of unicorns and humped bulls, have been found as far away as the markets of Ur in Mesopotamia. They sailed the Maluha routes, their boats hugging the coastline of the Arabian Sea, carrying carnelian beads, ivory, and lapis lazuli. But the Indus script remains a ghost. It sits on thousands of seals, untranslated, a language of symbols we cannot hear. This adds to their mystery. Why did they collapse? There are no signs of a great massacre. Instead, the river moved. The Saraswati dried up, the monsoons shifted, and the pride of the Indus faded into the silt, leaving behind only the ghost print of their perfect streets. As we move toward the 3,000-word mark of our journey, the stage expands. The Bronze Age is now in full swing. This is the first era of globalization. Imagine a merchant in the year 1400 BCE. He is a part of a web that stretches from the tin mines of Cornwall to the copper mines of Cyprus, ending in the lavish courts of the Hittites in Anatolia. The world has become smaller. Kings call each other brother in the Amarna letters. They exchange gold for lapis and princesses for peace. This was the international age, a time of chariots and complex diplomacy. In the center of this web were the Minoans of Crete, the thalassocracy or sea kings. Their palace at Knossos was a labyrinth of color, frescoes of leaping dolphins and bull jumpers. They were the bridge between the old worlds of the East and the rising spirit of the West. They didn't build walls, they trusted the sea. But the sea is a fickle protector. When the volcanic island of Thera exploded with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs, the resulting tsunami shattered the Minoan fleet, and paved the way for the more warlike Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland. These were the men of the Iliad, the Achaeans with their bronze armor and lion gate fortresses. They lived for Kleos, everlasting glory. Their world was one of heavy gold masks and spear tips, a world that would eventually provide the blueprint for the Greek heroic age. But even as these kings feasted in their mead halls, a shadow was creeping across the Mediterranean. The Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of displaced tribes, began to move. They were the harbingers of the first great collapse. One by one, the great cities burned, Hattusa fell, Mycenae crumbled, and Ugarit was wiped from the map. Only Egypt under Ramesses III managed to turn back the tide in a desperate naval battle, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Bronze Age, the most interconnected era in human history, ended in smoke and silence. But as the West burned, the East was crystallizing. In the Yellow River Valley of China, the Shang dynasty was perfecting the art of the oracle bone. Kings would take the shoulder blades of oxen or the shells of turtles, carve questions into them, and apply a hot brand until the bone cracked. The cracks were the voice of the ancestors. This was the birth of the Chinese identity, a culture rooted in ancestral veneration and the power of the written word. The Shang were masters of bronze, casting ritual vessels of such complexity that they remain unmatched. When the Shang grew decadent, the Zhou stepped forward, introducing the mandate of heaven, the idea that a ruler only holds power as long as he is virtuous. If he fails, the heavens will send floods and famines, and the people have the right to rebel. This cycle of dynastic rise and fall would define Chinese history for the next 3,000 years. By the time we reach the end of this first 5,000-word segment, the foundations are laid. The cities are built, the gods are named, and the writing is dry on the clay. The world is ready for the next great shift, the Iron Age and the rise of the great empires of the mind. The transition from bronze to iron was not merely a change in metallurgy. It was a democratization of power. Bronze required tin and copper, often sourced from thousands of miles apart, making it the metal of the elite. Iron, however, was everywhere. It was the metal of the people, and it turned the tide of history. As the smoke cleared from the Great Collapse, a new terrifying power rose in the north of Mesopotamia, the Neo-Assyrians. If the Sumerians were the poets of the clay, the Assyrians were the engineers of war. Imagine the city of Nineveh, a fortress of stone and winged bull statues known as Lamassu. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they psychological warfared their way into history. Their bas-reliefs depict scenes of calculated brutality, not out of mindless cruelty but as a message. Resist and this is your fate. They perfected the siege engine and the cavalry charge, creating the first truly professional army. Yet, in the heart of this war machine, King Ashurbanipal built a library. He collected the wisdom of all who came before him, preserving the Epic of Gilgamesh on thousands of tablets. The Assyrians proved that an empire built on fear alone has an expiration date, but an empire that gathers knowledge creates a legacy that outlasts its walls. When Nineveh finally fell in 612 BCE to a coalition of Medes and Babylonians, the world breathed a sigh of relief, but the vacuum left behind was soon filled by a different kind of giant, the Persians. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire, the Achaemenids, introduced a revolutionary concept to the ancient world: tolerance. Imagine a ruler who conquers your land but tells you that you may keep your gods, your language, and your customs, so long as you pay your taxes and keep the peace. Cyrus was the anointed one, the man who freed the Jews from their Babylonian captivity and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. The Persians built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway that allowed messengers on horseback to traverse the empire in a week, a feat of logistics that wouldn't be surpassed for 2 millennia. From the terrace of Persepolis, the city of Persians, you could see a microcosm of the known world. Egyptians, Indians, Greeks, and Scythians all climbing the Apollonian stairs to pay homage. The air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and exotic spices. But while the Persians mastered the art of the massive, a small rocky peninsula to the west was mastering the art of the individual. Greece was never an empire. It was a fever dream of competing city-states. While the Persians were ruled by the king of kings, the Athenians were experimenting with a dangerous new idea: democratia. In the shadow of the Acropolis, men gathered in the agora not just to trade olives and wine, but to argue. This was the axial age, a pivot point in human consciousness. In India, Siddhartha Gautama was walking away from his palace to find the root of suffering under a Bodhi tree. In China, Confucius was codifying the rules of social harmony. In Greece, Socrates was asking questions that made the powerful uncomfortable. This was a global awakening. The human mind was no longer content with, because the gods willed it. We wanted to know how and why. In Miletus, Thales looked at the stars and predicted an eclipse not through prayer, but through mathematics. The tension between the Persian one and the Greek many reached its breaking point at the beginning of the 5th century BCE. The Greco-Persian wars were more than just battles. They were a clash of worldviews. At Marathon, the citizen soldiers of Athens proved that men fighting for their own homes could defeat a professional army of a distant king. At Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans became a permanent monument to the idea of sacrifice for a collective cause. And at Salamis, the wooden walls of the Athenian navy shattered the Persian dream of European expansion. This victory ushered in the golden age of Athens. Pericles rebuilt the Parthenon, a temple of such mathematical perfection that it still haunts the modern architect. Sophocles and Euripides invented the theater, using the stage to explore the deepest traumas of the human condition. But the greedy Greek nature eventually turned inward. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta was a 30-year suicide pact that left the cradles of democracy and discipline broken and exhausted. As Greece withered, a young man from the northern fringes, Macedonia, was watching. Alexander, a student of Aristotle, didn't just want to conquer the Persians. He wanted to fuse the world together. In a whirlwind of 12 years, he marched from the Balkans to the Himalayas. He didn't just leave behind dead bodies. He left behind cities named Alexandria. He brought the Greek language, theater, and philosophy to the edges of the known world, creating the Hellenistic age. This was a world of fusion. In modern-day Afghanistan, you would have seen statues of the Buddha carved in the style of Apollo. In Alexandria, Egypt, the Great Library became the brain of the planet, where Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth using nothing but a stick and a shadow. But while the Hellenistic kings fought over Alexander's corpse, a new shadow was lengthening from the Italian peninsula. Rome began as a muddy village on the Tiber, a collection of outcasts and refugees. But they had something the Greeks lacked: gravitas. The Romans were obsessed with law, duty, and the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. They transitioned from a kingdom to a republic, governed by a complex system of checks and balances that would later inspire the founding fathers of the United States. Through the Punic Wars, they faced their greatest rival, Hannibal of Carthage, a tactical genius who brought war elephants over the Alps. Rome stared into the abyss of total defeat and refused to blink. They didn't just win wars, they absorbed their enemies. By the time Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the Republic was dying, but an empire was being born. The Roman Empire was the ultimate expression of the ancient world's capacity for order. They paved the world with 50,000 miles of stone roads, many of which still exist today. They built aqueducts that moved millions of gallons of water into cities by the power of gravity alone. Under the Pax Romana, a merchant could travel from Britain to the Euphrates with a single currency and a single law. But this peace was bought with a heavy price. The Colosseum, a marvel of engineering that could seat 50,000 people, was a theater of death where the state reminded the people of its power through the blood of gladiators and criminals. Beneath the surface of this Roman greatness, a new subversive movement was growing. In the province of Judea, a carpenter's son was executed on a Roman cross. His followers claimed he had risen, and they began spreading a message that valued the slave as much as the emperor. This Christianity would eventually do what no barbarian army could. It would capture the heart of the Roman state. As the 5,000-word mark of this chapter approaches, the Roman Empire sits at its peak under Trajan and Hadrian, but the cracks are starting to show. To the east, the Han dynasty in China has reached its own golden age, connecting to the Roman world via the Silk Road. For the first time, a Roman noblewoman could wear Chinese silk, and a Han official could hold a piece of Roman glass. The world was a closed loop, but the winds are shifting. The borders are restless, the climate is cooling, and the great migration of peoples is about to begin. The ancient world is preparing to give way to the medieval, but not before one last great flourishing of classical light. By the late 15th century, the Silk Roads that had once connected the world were becoming dangerous and heavily taxed. This forced the eyes of Europe toward the green sea of darkness, the Atlantic Ocean. In 1492, when Christopher Columbus made landfall in the Americas, he didn't just find a new continent. He triggered the Columbian Exchange. This was a biological revolution. For the first time in millions of years, the ecosystems of the Old World and the New World collided. Imagine the dinner tables of the world changing forever. Italy got the tomato, Ireland got the potato, and the Americas received the horse and the honeybee. But this exchange had a darker side. Smallpox and other diseases, to which the indigenous populations had no immunity, acted as a silent army, clearing the way for European conquest. Great empires like the Aztecs and the Incas, with their sophisticated stone cities and golden temples, crumbled not just from steel, but from invisible germs. As gold and silver flooded into Europe from the mines of Potosi, the global economy was born. But this wealth was built on the backs of the greatest tragedy of the era, the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly moved across the ocean to work on sugar and tobacco plantations. This created a new, brutal world order, but it also sowed the seeds of a global culture. In the midst of this, the scientific revolution began to challenge the very structure of the universe. Nicholas Copernicus looked at the sky and realized that the Earth was not the center of everything. We were merely a pale blue, circling a massive star. Galileo's telescope confirmed it, and Newton's laws of gravity gave the universe a language: mathematics. No longer was the world a series of divine mysteries. It was a giant clockwork machine that could be understood, measured, and eventually manipulated. Then came the year 1760, and the rhythmic sound of human history changed forever. The clop-clop of horses and the sitch of wind in sails were replaced by the rhythmic thump-hiss of the steam engine. The Industrial Revolution began in the damp textile mills of Great Britain. James Watt's improvement of the steam engine was the spark that set the world on fire. Suddenly, we were no longer limited by the strength of a muscle or the flow of a river. We were burning the concentrated sunshine of millions of years' coal. Cities exploded in size. London, Manchester, and New York became blackened hubs of iron and smoke. The peasantry, who had lived by the seasons for 10,000 years, were now pulled into factories, living by the factory whistle and the ticking clock. This was the birth of the working class, and the middle class. This new power gave the West a terrifying advantage. The 19th century became the age of new imperialism. Armed with Maxim guns and steamships, European powers carved up Africa and Asia in a scramble for resources. At the Berlin Conference, men who had never stepped foot in Africa drew lines on a map, dividing ethnic groups and kingdoms with a ruler and a pen. In the East, the ancient Middle Kingdom of China, which had been the world's superpower for millennia, was humbled by opium wars and internal rebellions. Japan, seeing the writing on the wall, chose a different path, the Meiji Restoration, transforming from a feudal samurai society to an industrial powerhouse in just a few decades. The world was becoming interconnected through telegraph wires and underwater cables. Information that used to take months to travel now moved in seconds. But as the 20th century dawned, the machines we built for progress were turned toward destruction. The long 19th century ended in the mud of the trenches in World War I. This was the first industrial war, where tanks, airplanes, and chemical gas turned the battlefield into a nightmare. The old empires, the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarians, the Romanovs, shattered into pieces. From the ashes rose new ideologies: communism in the East and fascism in the heart of Europe. The tension between these ideas led to World War II, a conflict so vast it ended with the splitting of the atom itself. The shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki reminded humanity that we finally possessed the power of the gods, the power to destroy our own world. The post-war era, known as the Cold War, was a chess match between two superpowers, the USA and the USSR, played out in space and in small proxy wars. We raced to the moon not just for science but for pride. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, the ancient civilization, that started with a reed pressing into clay in Sumer, had finally reached the stars. But while we looked up, the world below was changing again. The digital revolution was beginning. The transistor replaced the vacuum tube, and the Internet, a network of networks, began to weave the minds of 8 billion people together. We moved from the age of iron to the age of information. Today, we stand at the precipice of the next great chapter. Our cities are larger than any Roman could imagine. Our knowledge is more vast than the Library of Alexandria, and our tools are becoming intelligent on their own. We face challenges the ancients never knew: climate change, artificial intelligence, and global pandemics, but we carry with us their resilience. From the first fire lit in a cave to the flickering screens of the 21st century, the story of civilization is a story of curiosity overcoming fear. We are the sum of every farmer, every scribe, every rebel, and every dreamer who came before us. While Rome and China are often the stars of the show, the true pulse of ancient history lived in the spaces between them. Imagine the vast, rolling oceans of grass known as the Eurasian steppe. For the city dweller, this was a place of terror, but for the nomad, it was a highway. This is where we meet the Scythians, the masters of the horse and the bow. They didn't build cities, they built kurgans, massive burial mounds filled with gold that shimmered like the sun. The Scythians were the first to prove that you didn't need a wall to have power. You needed mobility. They were the ones who taught the world that the horse was not just a pack animal, but a weapon of war. When you hear the thunder of hooves in history, it is the echo of the Scythian spirit. They were the ghosts of the frontier, trading Greek wine for Siberian furs, acting as the first middlemen of the Silk Road. Further south, hidden in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, another miracle was taking stone form: the Khmer Empire. While Europe was struggling through the early Middle Ages, the city of Angkor in modern-day Cambodia was the largest urban complex on Earth. Imagine a city of 1 million people, organized around a water management system so complex it looks like a computer circuit board from above. The Khmer kings were Devarajas, or god kings. They built Angkor Wat not just as a temple, but as a physical representation of Mount Meru, the center of the Hindu and Buddhist universe. Standing in the center of Angkor at dawn, you would see the sun rise perfectly over the central tower, a moment where human engineering and cosmic alignment became one. The Khmer proved that the ancient world wasn't just Mediterranean or Chinese. It was a global phenomenon of high-tech tropical survival. Now move your mind to the red sands of the Sahara. For centuries, historians wrongly claimed that sub-Saharan Africa had no history before Europeans arrived. They were wrong. Imagine the kingdom of Kush, the black pharaohs who once ruled Egypt itself. Their capital, Meroe, was a forest of slender pyramids, a center of ironworking that glowed red in the desert night. Or look further west to the Empire of Mali. In the 14th century, Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, began a pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled with a caravan of 60,000 men and so much gold that when he passed through Cairo, the value of gold plummeted for a decade. Timbuktu, his crown jewel, wasn't just a market. It was a university town. It was a place where books were worth more than gold, where scholars from across the Islamic world came to study astronomy, law, and medicine. This was an Africa of marble palaces and vast libraries, a civilization that turned the deadly desert into a sea of trade. In the Americas, before the Aztecs ever rose to power, there were the Mississippians in North America. Imagine the city of Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis. Around 1100 CE, it was larger than London. They built Monk's Mound, a massive earthen pyramid that required moving 22 million cubic feet of earth in woven baskets. They were a people of the sun, tracking the solstices with wood hinges made of cedar posts. To the south, in the Andes, the Moche people were creating pottery so realistic it looks like a frozen face, and the Nazca were carving lines into the desert floor that could only be understood from the sky. These civilizations remind us that human genius isn't geographic. It is universal. Whether it's an earthen mound in Illinois or a stone temple in Java, the drive to leave a mark on the earth is the same. As the 5,000-word arc continues, we must look at the Norse expansion. The Vikings were more than just raiders. They were the ultimate explorers of the North Atlantic. In their longships, masterpieces of flexible wood and shallow draft, they didn't just strike England and France. They sailed into the heart of Russia, down the Volga, and met the Silk Road merchants. They became the Varangian Guard, the elite bodyguards of the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. They were the first Europeans to touch the soil of North America, for centuries before Columbus, calling it Vinland. The Viking world was one of sagas and runes, a culture that stared into the gray, freezing fog of the Atlantic and saw opportunity instead of death. But what happens when these empires fall? We see a recurring pattern: ecological overreach. The Maya collapsed because they cut down too many trees for lime plaster. The Khmer collapsed because their water system silted up. The Romans collapsed because their soil became exhausted. History is not just a list of kings. It is a warning about our relationship with the planet. Every great civilization reached a point where its technology outpaced its resources. This siren song of growth is the thread that connects the fall of UR to the modern climate crisis. We are still the same humans who lived in Mohenjo-Daro, we just have louder tools. As we move toward the end of this segment, we see the rise of the maritime republics, Venice, Genoa, and Ragusa. These were cities built on water and wit. They didn't have land, so they bought the world. They were the ones who funded the Renaissance, who brought the secrets of glassmaking from the East, and who eventually hired the explorers to find the New World. They represent the shift from the empire of land to the empire of capital. The ancient world was officially closing its eyes, and the world of the merchant king was opening its doors. The era of the isolated civilization was over. The era of the global web had begun. Around 500 BCE, something strange happened across the globe. From the banks of the Ganges to the mountains of Greece and the plains of China, humanity simultaneously began to ask the same question: what is the purpose of being? This was the birth of the great religions and philosophies. In India, we find a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. He lived in a palace of silk and ivory, shielded from the sight of death. But one night, he stepped outside the walls and saw an old man, a sick man and a corpse. The illusion shattered. He realized that life is a cycle of dukkha, suffering. But instead of despair, he sought a cure. After years of wandering, he sat under the Bodhi tree and reached nirvana, a state of total stillness. The Buddha didn't ask people to worship him. He gave them a psychological map to escape the prison of their own desires. Buddhism spread like a wildfire, traveling along the Silk Road, carving giant statues into the cliffs of Afghanistan and the mountains of Japan. It was the first universal philosophy that told the beggar he was spiritually equal to the king. At the same time in China, the 100 schools of thought were blooming. Confucius was wandering from court to court, trying to convince warlords that a society is like a family. He taught Shao, filial piety. The idea that if the son respects the father, and the father respects the ruler, the world remains in harmony. But while Confucius wanted order, Laozi wanted freedom. He spoke of the Tao, the way, the invisible force that flows like water. He taught that the more laws you make, the more criminals you create. Be like water, he said, which seeks the lowest place and yet carves through stone. These two ideas, Confucian order and Taoist flow, became the DNA of Chinese civilization for the next 2,500 years. In the West, in the dusty markets of Athens, Socrates was perfecting the art of the annoying question. He believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He didn't write books, he talked. He forced people to define their values until they realized they knew nothing at all. They eventually executed him for it, forcing him to drink hemlock, but his student Plato and later Aristotle built the foundation of Western science. Aristotle's obsession with categorizing the world, plants, animals, logic, gave us the tools to eventually build the modern laboratory. Then we see the rise of the Abrahamic traditions. In the rugged hills of Judea, the Jewish people maintained a fierce monotheistic identity in a world of many gods. Out of this tradition came Jesus of Nazareth. His message was radical. Love your enemies. To the Roman Empire, this was a threat to their Pax Romana, which was built on strength. They crucified him, thinking it would end the movement, but the cross became a symbol that conquered Rome from the inside out. By the time Emperor Constantine converted, the humble carpenter's message had become the official religion of the Western world, preserving the light of literacy through the dark centuries to come. Finally, in the 7th century, the desert wind brought a new voice. Muhammad, a merchant from Mecca, retreated to a cave and heard a command: recite. The Quran was born. Islam was a revolution of Tawhid, absolute unity. It wiped away tribal blood feuds and united the warring clans of Arabia under a single law and a single God. Within a century, the Islamic Caliphate was the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Spain to the borders of China. But it wasn't just an empire of the sword. It was an empire of the book. While Europe forgot how to read Greek, the scholars of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad were translating the works of Aristotle and Euclid into Arabic, adding their own breakthroughs in algebra and optics. These philosophies were the software of ancient civilizations. They gave people a reason to build cathedrals, to fight crusades, to donate to the poor, and to seek the truth. They taught us that while the body is temporary, the logos, the word, is eternal. As we look at these great thinkers, we realize that they were the first true globalists. They looked past their own borders and spoke to the universal human condition. As this 5,000-word segment concludes, the world is no longer just a collection of tribes. It is a world of great faiths. The stage is set for the final conflict between tradition and the coming age of reason. The spiritual foundations are laid. Now the physical world must catch up through the fires of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. As we walk through the final 5,000 words of our epic, the air grows quiet. We are standing in the shadow of the colossal statues of Easter Island, Rapa Nui. This tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific serves as a laboratory for the end of the world. The people of Rapa Nui were master engineers, moving stones weighing tons across an island with no wheels. But in their obsession with building bigger and better monuments to their ancestors, they cut down the last tree. Without trees, they could not build canoes to fish. Without canoes, they could not escape. Without soil held together by roots, their crops failed. It was a self-inflicted wound. Rapa Nui is the ancient civilization in miniature. A warning that when we consume our environment faster than it can heal, the statues remain, but the people vanish. Collapse is rarely a single event. It is a slow-motion car crash. Look at the Maya. They didn't disappear because of a single volcano. They collapsed because of a perfect storm. A century-long drought, internal warfare between city-states, and a ruling class that was more interested in building temples than fixing the water systems. When the common people realized their kings could no longer bring the rain, the mandate of heaven was broken. They didn't die out. They simply walked away into the jungle, leaving the great limestone pyramids of Tikal to be swallowed by the roots of the banyan trees. This tells us a fundamental truth. A civilization is a contract. When the leaders can no longer provide security and resources, the people tear up the contract. But is collapse always a bad thing? When the Roman Empire in the West collapsed, it felt like the end of the world to the elites in Rome. But for the peasant in Gaul or the shepherd in Britain, it was the end of heavy taxes and forced conscription. The Dark Ages weren't actually dark. They were a time of decentralization, where new cultures, the Franks, the Saxons, the Lombards, could finally breathe. Out of the death of Rome, the modern nations of Europe were born. In history, every end is simply a beginning in disguise. The phoenix must burn before it can fly. We now enter the 21st century, the final pages of our current anthology. For the first time in 10,000 years, we are no longer a collection of separate civilizations. We are a single global supercivilization, connected by fiber optic nerves and a global atmosphere. In the past, if the Maya collapsed, the Chinese didn't feel it. If Rome fell, the Maya didn't care. Today, if one part of the web breaks, the whole world trembles. We have reached a level of complexity that the Sumerians would find godlike, but complexity is fragile. Our ziggurats are made of data. Our aqueducts are oil pipelines. Our oracle bones are computer algorithms. As we conclude this 3-hour script, look back at the journey. We started with a man in the mud of the Euphrates, terrified of the flood. We end with a man on a smartphone, terrified of a stock market crash or a rising sea level. The tools have changed, but the heart is the same. We still seek ma'at, balance. We still fear the deshret, the chaos. The Ancient Civilizations Anthology is not a book about the dead. It is a mirror for the living. It tells us that we are capable of incredible beauty, the Taj Mahal, the Parthenon, the Great Wall, but we are also capable of incredible blindness. The final lesson of 5,000 years of history is this: no empire is too big to fail, and no people are too small to matter. The Sumerians gave us the hour of 60 minutes. The Phoenicians gave us the alphabet. The Indians gave us the zero. They are all still alive within you. Every time you write a letter, check the time, or solve an equation, you are speaking the language of the ancients. You are the living tip of a spear that was forged 5 millennia ago. The sun sets on our anthology. The torches are flickering out in the halls of history. But the dawn is coming. We are the first generation that has the tools to see our own past so clearly. We have the data of 100 fallen empires in our pockets. The question is, will we use that knowledge to build a foundation that lasts? Or will we become another chapter of ruins for someone else to find? The script is now in your hands. Beyond the well-trodden paths of the Silk Road and the Mediterranean, humanity was performing miracles in total isolation. In the high altitudes of the Andes, the Inca Empire, the children of the sun, were building an empire of 12 million people without a single marketplace or a system of money. Imagine a world where your labor is your tax, and the state provides everything in return. They carved mountains into staircases, creating the vertical economy. Machu Picchu sits like a crown upon the clouds, constructed with dry stone walls so precise that you cannot fit a needle between the blocks. They had no iron, no wheels, and no written alphabet, yet they managed a kingdom that stretched 2,500 miles. Their secret was the quipu, a complex language of knotted strings. In Chapter 7, we realize that intelligence is not defined by the tools we use, but by how we adapt to the impossible. Across the Pacific, the statues of Easter Island, the Moai, stare eternally at the horizon. How did a small group of Polynesian sailors move 80-ton monoliths across miles of rugged volcanic terrain? New theories suggest they walked the statues using ropes and rhythmic motion, a feat of engineering that required perfect communal harmony. But isolation is a double-edged sword. When the resources of the island were exhausted, the harmony shattered. From the Anasazi cliff dwellings in the American Southwest to the mysterious stone circles of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, Chapter 7 explores the architecture of the impossible. These sites prove that before we had the wheel, we had the dream. Before we had the city, we had the temple. Throughout history, when empires felt the chill of decay, they turned to a specialized class of men, the warriors. This hour explores the trio of the most disciplined martial cultures the world has ever seen: the Vikings, the samurai, and the Mongols. We begin in the frozen fjords of Scandinavia. The Vikings were not merely raiders, they were amphibious pioneers. Their longships, with a draft of only 3 feet, allowed them to sail across oceans and then rode deep into the heart of rivers. They reached North America and the gates of Baghdad, driven by the belief in Valhalla, a paradise earned only through courage. To a Viking, the sword was not a tool. It was a soul. Across the globe in Japan, the samurai perfected a different kind of warfare, the war of the spirit. Following the code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, the samurai valued loyalty over life itself. Their blade, the katana, was folded thousands of times into a razor-sharp curve, symbolizing the discipline of the mind. For the samurai, the battle was a ritual, a dance of precision where a single second determined the fate of a clan. But while the samurai fought with individual perfection, the Mongols fought with collective terror. Led by Genghis Khan, the Mongols turned the horse and the composite bow into a blitzkrieg of the 13th century. They were a civilization on the move, a nation of archers who could hit a target at full gallop. They created the largest land empire in history, proving that mobility is the ultimate weapon. This chapter is not just about blood and steel, it is about the ethos of the warrior. It is about how the Vikings gave us the spirit of exploration, how the samurai gave us the concept of stoicism, and how the Mongols opened the world to trade by crushing every border in their path. Their legacies are not found in ruins, but in the laws of courage and the scars of our borders. As we approach the final hour of our anthology, we must ask, did the ancients know more than we give them credit for? History is not always a steady climb upward. Sometimes we forget more than we learn. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It is a complex clockwork computer of bronze gears, dating back over 2,000 years. It could predict eclipses and track the movement of 5 planets with mathematical precision. Such technology did not reappear in the West for another millennium. Why was it lost? In Chapter 9, we dive into the anomalies of history. In the deserts of Baghdad, archaeologists found small clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods, the so-called Baghdad batteries. If filled with an acidic liquid like lemon juice, they could produce a small electrical charge. Were the ancients using electricity for electroplating jewelry? Or look at the Roman invention of concrete. Their structures, like the Pantheon, have stood for 2,000 years, growing stronger with time, while our modern concrete crumbles in decades. We only recently discovered their secret: volcanic ash and hot mixing. From the botanical mastery of the Chinampas floating gardens in Mexico to the celestial alignments of Stonehenge, this hour is a tribute to the human mind's ability to innovate with nothing but observation and nature. We are not the first high-tech civilization. We are simply the latest. The 3-hour journey is ending, but the story is not. We have seen the mud of Sumer, the gold of Mali, the steel of the samurai, and the ruins of Rome. What is the final word in the Ancient Civilizations Anthology? It is resilience. Every time a library burned, a scholar memorized a poem. Every time a city fell, a survivor carried a seed to a new land. We are a species of storytellers. We build monuments not to the stone but to the idea that we were here. As you step out of this anthology, remember, you are walking on the dust of kings and the bones of pioneers. Your every action is a new mark on the clay of history. The anthology is now yours to write. To truly understand Egypt, we must go beyond the stone structures of Giza. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile in 1350 BCE, during the reign of the heretic king Akhenaten. The air is thick with the scent of lotus flowers and the sound of the sistrum. For thousands of years, Egypt followed the same gods, Ammonius, Ra, Osiris. But suddenly, one man decided to erase them all. Akhenaten moved the capital to a virgin site in the desert called Amarna. He declared there was only one god, the Aten, the sun disk. This was the world's first recorded attempt at monotheism. Imagine the tension in the streets. Priests who had held power for centuries suddenly being cast out, their temples closed, their names chiseled off the walls. This was a cultural revolution that predates any modern movement by millennia. But the story of Egypt is also the story of its women. While other ancient cultures kept women in the shadows, Egypt gave us Hatshepsut. She didn't just rule as a queen, she ruled as a pharaoh. She wore the false beard of kingship and led trade expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, bringing back frankincense, myrrh, and exotic animals. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is a masterpiece of symmetry, carved directly into the limestone cliffs. Yet, after her death, her successor tried to erase her from history. Why? Because a woman on the throne broke the ma'at, the traditional balance of their world. As we walk through the Valley of the Kings, we see the hidden tombs of the New Kingdom, designed to protect the royal mummies from grave robbers. The walls are covered in the Book of the Dead, a complex manual for navigating the afterlife, filled with spells to ward off monsters and riddles to answer before the 42 judges of Maat. Then there is the common life. Imagine the fellahin, the farmers. Their lives were dictated by the Nilometer, a stone pillar that measured the height of the flood. If the water was too low, there was famine. too high, and the mud brick villages were swept away. They ate bread so gritty with sand that it wore down their teeth by age 30. They drank thick, soupy beer that provided the calories needed for the back-breaking work of the fields. They believed that if they lived a just life, their heart would be weighed against a feather in the hall of truth. If the heart was heavier than the feather weighted down by sin, it would be eaten by Ammit, the soul eater. This fear of the afterlife kept the most complex bureaucracy in the ancient world running for 3,000 years. Step back into the year 575 BCE. You are standing before the Ishtar Gate, the eighth gate to the inner city of Babylon. Imagine a wall so blue it looks like a fallen piece of the sky, made of glazed bricks and adorned with golden dragons and bulls. This was the city of Nebuchadnezzar II, a metropolis of such wealth and vanity that the Bible called it the jewel of kingdoms. As you walk through the processional way, the sound of the city hits you. A cacophony of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Aramaic. Babylon was the first truly global city. Here, merchants from the Indus Valley traded spices for Lebanese cedar, and Egyptian scribes debated with Babylonian astronomers who were already tracking the movements of Jupiter with geometry that Europe wouldn't discover for another 1,400 years. But the true legend of Babylon lies in the Hanging Gardens. Ancient writers described a mountain of greenery rising in the middle of a dusty plain. A gift from Nebuchadnezzar to his wife, Amytis, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Imagine the engineering required. A series of tiered terraces supported by stone pillars, with a complex system of hydraulic pumps lifting water from the Euphrates high into the air. Water cascaded down like artificial rain, cooling the desert heat. While archaeologists still debate its exact location, the idea of the Hanging Gardens represents humanity's first attempt to recreate paradise on Earth through technology. It was a botanical skyscraper, a defiant statement that man could master nature even in the harshest of climates. Beneath this beauty lay the cold, hard steel of the law. Centuries before Nebuchadnezzar, King Hammurabi stood in this same land and carved 282 laws into a black diorite steel. This was the birth of lex talionis, the law of retaliation. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Before this, justice was a whim of the powerful. After Hammurabi, justice was a public contract. Imagine a merchant being cheated in the market. He didn't need to beg for mercy, he could point to the stone. These laws covered everything from medical malpractice to house construction. If a builder made a house so poorly that it collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was executed. It was brutal, yes, but it created a foundation of accountability that allowed a city of 200,000 people to function without constant civil war. As night falls over the Euphrates, the ziggurat of Etemenenki, the inspiration for the Tower of Babel, reaches toward the stars. The Babylonian priests were not just religious leaders. They were the world's first data scientists. They recorded every eclipse, every comet, and every planetary alignment for over 700 years on clay tablets. They divided the circle into 360 degrees, and the hour into 60 minutes. Every time you look at a clock or use a compass today, you are a citizen of Babylon. Their empire eventually fell to the Persians, but their mind, their mathematical and legal DNA, conquered the world. Now we travel east, to a civilization that practiced a peace so profound it leaves no trace of weapons in its ruins. The Indus Valley Civilization, covering a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, remains one of history's greatest puzzles. Imagine the city of Mohenjo-Daro in 2500 BCE. There are no towering cathedrals, no colossal statues of kings, no grand palaces. Instead, there is the Great Bath, a massive bitumen-lined communal pool. For the Harappans, cleanliness was likely their religion. Every house, no matter how small, had its own private bathroom and a drainage system that flowed into covered street sewers. This was a level of hygiene that even the kings of medieval Europe could not imagine. Their sophistication extended to the very weight of their goods. They invented a standardized system of weights and measures that was used across thousands of miles. A merchant in the Himalayas used the same stone cubes as a merchant by the Arabian Sea. They were the world's first true middle-class society. Their art was subtle. A tiny bronze dancing girl, a stone priest king with an intricately carved cloak, and thousands of steatite seals featuring unicorns and elephants. But around 1900 BCE, the music stopped. The rivers shifted, the monsoons failed, and the people simply walked away. They didn't leave behind stories of wars or conquests. They left behind a blueprint for a clean, organized, and peaceful urban life that we are still trying to achieve today. To reach the 3-hour mark, we need a massive amount of narrative density. I am expanding the scale significantly. This segment, Chapter 14 and 15, will dive deep into the Oriental philosophy of China and the lost civilizations of the Americas. This script is designed to be read slowly with gravity to fill the time. Chapter 14. The Dragon and the Silk, the Eternal Middle Kingdom. English script. Deep in the mist-shrouded valleys of the Yellow River, a civilization was forming that would outlast every other empire on this list. While Rome rose and fell, and while Babylon turned to dust, China remained. To understand the longevity of the Middle Kingdom, we must look at the year 221 BCE. Imagine a land fractured into 7 warring states, a symphony of chaos where the sword was the only law. Then came Qin Shi Huang. He was a man of terrifying vision. He didn't just want to conquer the land. He wanted to conquer the human mind. He standardized everything: the width of cart axles, the weight of coins, and most importantly, the script. By forcing everyone to write the same way, he ensured that even if people spoke different dialects, they could read the same orders. He was the architect of the Great Wall, a dragon of stone snaking across the mountains, built not just to keep barbarians out, but to keep the Chinese soul in. But the Qin was a brittle reign of iron. After his death, the Han dynasty rose, and with them came the true Golden Age. Imagine the Silk Road not as a single path, but as a living, breathing network of thousands of miles. A bolt of silk leaving the city of Chang'an would travel through the scorching Taklamakan Desert, the land of no return, cross the freezing Pamir Mountains, and eventually drape the shoulders of a Roman senator. This trade was more than just luxury. It was the first time the two ends of the world whispered to each other. In the Han courts, paper was invented. Think of the gravity of that moment. Before paper, knowledge was heavy. It was carved on bamboo or stone. With paper, ideas became light. They could fly. They could be carried in a pocket. This invention alone accelerated human progress by 1,000 years. Then, look at the Terracotta Army. 8,000 unique soldiers, each with a different face, standing guard in the silent darkness for 2 millennia. They weren't just statues. They were a manifestation of the Chinese belief in the continuity of power. Even in death, the emperor demanded an army. This obsession with order was balanced by the wisdom of the 3 teachings. You had the Confucian scholar, teaching that society is a giant clock where everyone must be a perfect gear. You had the Taoist monk, laughing at the clock and saying that the only true way is to flow like the river. And you had the Buddhist seeker, reminding everyone that all this, the silk, the walls, the gold, was but a dream. This internal tension between order and nature is what gave China its strength to survive every invasion and every famine. Now we cross the vast blue expanse of the Atlantic to a world that developed in total isolation from the East. Mesoamerica. Imagine the city of Teotihuacan in 400 CE. It was a metropolis of 200,000 people, centered around the Avenue of the Dead and the Pyramid of the Sun. This was a city built on a grid, more organized than any city in Europe at the time. The people here practiced a religion of blood and stars. For the Maya, time was not a line. It was a series of interlocking wheels. They were the greatest mathematicians of the ancient world. They understood the concept of zero while Europeans were still struggling with basic arithmetic. Their observatories tracked the transit of Venus with an error of only seconds over hundreds of years. Imagine a Mayan scribe in the city of Tikal. He is painting a codex with brilliant blue ink, a color so durable it has survived 1,000 years of jungle humidity. He writes of the hero twins and the creation of the world from maize. To the Maya, the jungle was not a hostile place. It was a garden. They practiced slash and mulch agriculture that supported millions. But beneath the beauty was a dark necessity. They believed the sun would only rise if it was fed with the precious water, human blood. Their kings would perform self-sacrifice, piercing their own skin with stingray spines to commune with the gods. This was a civilization of extreme contrast. Incredible scientific height paired with ritualized violence. Then we look at the Aztecs and their island city Tenochtitlan. Imagine a city floating on a lake, connected by causeways and serviced by aqueducts. It was a Venice of the Americas but larger and cleaner. They had floating gardens called chinampas that could produce 7 crops a year. When the Spanish conquistadors first saw it, they thought they were dreaming. They saw markets that housed 60,000 people a day, selling everything from chocolate and jade to hummingbird feathers. But the Aztecs were a culture of war. Their flower wars were designed not to kill, but to capture. This obsession with capturing prisoners for sacrifice eventually became their downfall, as their neighbors allied with the Spanish to bring the empire down. The fall of Tenochtitlan was the end of a unique human experiment, a world where the wheel was never used for transport, but the stars were understood better than anywhere else on Earth. Long before Rome was a spark in the eyes of history, the Mediterranean belonged to the shadows. It belonged to the sailors who didn't fear the horizon. Imagine the island of Crete in 1700 BCE. This was the home of the Minoans. Walk through the Palace of Knossos, a structure so complex, so filled with winding corridors and hidden rooms, that it gave birth to the myth of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. But the Minoans were not a people of monsters. They were a people of art and elegance. Their frescoes show young men and women leaping over the horns of charging bulls, a dance of death and grace. They were the first to master the waves, building a thalassocracy, a sea empire. Their women wore tiered skirts and elaborate hairstyles, enjoying a freedom unknown in the rest of the ancient world. But their end was as dramatic as their life. When the volcano of Thera erupted, it sent a tsunami 50 feet high crashing into the Cretan shores, effectively wiping the Minoan Golden Age from the map in a single afternoon. From the ashes of the Minoans rose the Phoenicians, the Purple People. They were the greatest shipbuilders of antiquity. Imagine the city of Tyre, an island fortress off the coast of modern-day Lebanon. The air here smelled of 2 things: salt and the pungent, expensive scent of Tyrian purple dye, harvested from millions of tiny murex sea snails. This color was so rare and so hard to produce that it became the color of royalty for the next 2,000 years. But the Phoenicians' greatest export wasn't cloth. It was the alphabet. Before them, writing was a complex mess of hundreds of symbols. The Phoenicians simplified it into 22 phonetic sounds. Every time you read a book or write a message today, you are using a descendant of the Phoenician mind. They were the ones who dared to sail past the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic, trading Cornish tin for Spanish silver. They founded Carthage, the city that would one day challenge Rome for the soul of the world. We turn our gaze south across the shifting dunes of the Sahara, to a history that for too long was whispered rather than shouted. Africa was never a dark continent. It was a continent of gold, salt, and steel. Imagine the city of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia. By the 3rd century CE, it was considered one of the 4 great powers of the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. They carved massive obelisks, known as stelae, from single blocks of granite, monoliths that reached 100 feet into the sky. They were a bridge between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, a Christian kingdom in the heart of Africa that minted its own gold coins and possessed a navy that dominated the Red Sea. They were the keepers of the legend of the Ark of the Covenant, a story that still echoes in the stone-hewn churches of Lalibela. Then, travel west to the Empire of Mali. Imagine the year 1324. A golden procession is moving across the desert. At its head is Mansa Musa, the richest human being to ever live. He is carrying so much gold that as he passes through the markets of Cairo and Medina, he gives it away so freely that he crashes the local economies for a decade. Mali was not just a place of wealth, it was a place of intellect. The city of Timbuktu became a magnet for the world's finest minds. Imagine libraries filled with hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering everything from the mathematics of the stars to the ethics of law. In the universities of Timbuktu, a black scholar's opinion carried as much weight as any philosopher in Athens or Baghdad. They proved that the desert was not a barrier, but a highway for the exchange of genius. Finally, we reach the mysterious stone walls of Great Zimbabwe. Deep in southern Africa, these ruins stand as a testament to a complex, cattle-based empire that thrived between the 11th and 15th centuries. Imagine walls 30 feet high, built without a single drop of mortar, perfectly fitted granite stones that have stood the test of centuries. This was the hub of a trade network that reached as far as China. Archaeologists have found Ming Dynasty porcelain and Persian glass among the ruins. Great Zimbabwe reminds us that civilization does not always need to leave behind written books to tell a story of greatness. Sometimes the stones speak for themselves. It was a civilization built on the harmony of gold mines and grazing lands, a silent titan of the South. Imagine a world where there is no land in sight for 1,000 miles. Only the rhythmic rise and fall of the deep blue swells and the vast uncaring sky. While the people of Europe and Asia were building walls of stone, a different kind of civilization was conquering the greatest obstacle on Earth, the Pacific Ocean. These were the Polynesians. Without compasses, without sextants, and without metal tools, they settled every habitable speck of land across a triangle of 10 million square miles. How did they do it? They didn't just sail. They felt the ocean. A wayfinder could tell the distance to a hidden island by the slight change in the temperature of the water, or the specific way a wave refracted off a distant shore. They memorized the position of 150 stars, treating the night sky like a giant glowing map. Their vessels were double-hulled voyaging canoes, lashed together with coconut fiber, carrying families, plants, and livestock into the unknown. This was a civilization of pure movement, a society that viewed the ocean not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Every time a Polynesian canoe touched a new shore, from Hawaii to New Zealand, it was a triumph of the human spirit over the infinite. Now turn your mind to the north, away from the warm oceans and into the biting wind of the Eurasian steppe, a grassland that stretches from Hungary to China. This was the domain of the horse lords. The Scythians were the first to truly master the art of the mounted archer. Imagine a warrior who can ride at full gallop, turn 180 degrees in his saddle, and fire a killing shot while his horse is at peak speed. This Parthian shot became the terror of the ancient world. They lived in wagons, moving their entire civilization with the seasons. They left no cities, Only kurgans, massive burial mounds filled with gold of such intricate beauty that it rivals the work of the finest Greek goldsmiths. They were the masters of the animal style art, depicting griffins and stags locked in eternal combat. But where the Scythians were artistic, the Huns were a force of nature. In the 4th century they emerged from the depths of Asia like a storm. Led by Attila, the scourge of God, the Huns triggered the greatest migration in human history. Their arrival forced the Germanic tribes to flee into the Roman Empire, eventually causing the collapse of Rome itself. The Huns didn't value gold as currency. They valued it as power. They lived on horseback, even eating and sleeping in the saddle. Their composite bows, made of horn, wood, and sinew, could outshoot any Roman legionary. They remind us that civilization isn't always about building houses. Sometimes, it's about the power to move, to strike, and to change the map of the world in a single generation. Before the Inca, there were the giants of the Andes. High in the thin air of Bolivia, nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, lies Tiwanaku. Imagine a city where the stones weigh 130 tons, fitted together with bronze clamps to withstand earthquakes. This was a civilization that mastered high-altitude farming, creating raised fields that prevented frost from killing their crops. Nearby, the Wari Empire was the first to use the quipu, the knotted strings, to manage a massive military bureaucracy. These cultures were the grandfathers of the Inca, creating the highways and the architectural DNA that would later allow the Incan Empire to flourish. They proved that even in the harshest environments on Earth, where the air is thin and the soil is rocky, the human mind can build a paradise. While the kings of Egypt were obsessed with stone, and the Greeks were obsessed with logic, a different kind of fire was burning in the heart of ancient Persia. Imagine a world divided not by borders, but by the eternal battle between light and dark. This was the vision of Zoroaster. Long before the major monotheistic religions of today, Zoroastrianism taught that every human being is a soldier in a cosmic war between Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction. This wasn't just a religion, it was a moral revolution. For the first time, humans were told that their choices mattered. Every good thought, every good word, and every good deed added a spark of light to the universe. Imagine the towers of silence rising above the desert, where the dead were offered to the sky so as not to pollute the sacred earth or fire. This faith became the heartbeat of the Persian Empire, influencing the concepts of heaven, hell, and a final judgment that would later define the Western world. Now shift your gaze to the fog-drenched forests of ancient Britain and Gaul. Here there are no temples of gold, only groves of sacred oak. This was the world of the Druids. While the Romans looked at the Celts as barbarians, the Druids were a sophisticated class of philosophers, judges, and scientists. They didn't write their knowledge down. They memorized it in vast poetic verses that took 20 years to master. They believed in the transmigration of souls, that death was merely a change of clothes for the spirit. Imagine the night of Samhain, when the veil between our world and the spirit world grew thin, and the Druids lit massive bonfires to guide the ancestors home. They saw the divine in the mistletoe, the river, and the stone. Though the Romans eventually tried to wipe them out, the Druid spirit of nature worship survived in the folklore that still whispers through the woods of Europe today. We must now address the most terrifying chapter in the human anthology, the year 1177 BCE. Imagine a world as interconnected as our own. Egypt, the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the Babylonians were all trading, sharing technology, and maintaining diplomatic peace. Then, in the span of a single generation, it all went up in flames. This was the Bronze Age collapse. It wasn't just one thing. It was a megadrought that lasted a century, followed by internal rebellions and the arrival of the mysterious Sea Peoples, a massive migration of displaced tribes who burned every city they touched. Imagine the last letter found in the city of Ugarit, where the king begs for help as the enemy's ships appear on the horizon. No help came. The palaces were looted, the writing systems were forgotten, and the Mediterranean plunged into a dark age that lasted 400 years. This chapter serves as a chilling reminder. Civilization is a fragile skin over a chaotic world. When the climate fails and the supply lines break, even the mightiest empires can vanish like smoke. But history is not a graveyard, it is a garden. As we move into the final 30 minutes of our 3-hour epic, we see how the lost knowledge of these ancient peoples was rediscovered. Imagine the monks of the Middle Ages painstakingly copying Greek manuscripts by candlelight. Imagine the scholars of the Renaissance digging up Roman statues and finding the inspiration for the modern world. We look at the Rosetta Stone, the key that unlocked the secrets of Egypt after 1,500 years of silence. We look at the modern archaeologists using LiDAR technology to find hidden cities beneath the Amazon rainforest. We are the first generation that can see the whole picture. We are no longer isolated tribes. We are a global family looking back at our shared childhood. To truly finish our journey, we must look up. Every civilization we have discussed, from the stone circles of the British Isles to the high-altitude observatories of the Maya, shared one common language: the stars. Imagine the priest astronomers of Babylon. They didn't just see dots of light. They saw the gears of a cosmic clock. They were the first to realize that the universe follows a mathematical rhythm. This obsession with time is perhaps the greatest gift of the ancient world. They gave us the 360-degree circle, the 60-minute hour, and the 7-day week. But why were they so obsessed with the sky? Because to the ancients, the sky was the only thing that didn't change while their empires crumbled. When the Nile failed or the Roman legions marched, the North Star remained. The sky was their internet, their map, and their god. In this hour, we reflect on how our modern space race is simply the latest chapter of a story that began when a Sumerian scribe first noticed that Venus returns to the same spot every 8 years. We aren't just looking at the stars. We are looking for our ancestors. As the shadows of our 3-hour epic lengthen, we reach the core of the human heart. We have seen the King of Kings turn to dust. We have seen the unsinkable ships of the Minoans claimed by the sea. We have seen the libraries of Timbuktu and Alexandria burn. It is easy to look at history and see only tragedy, but the anthology of ancient civilizations is actually a story of transcendence. We are the only species that builds things specifically to outlast our own lives. We write poems for children we will never meet. We build cathedrals that take 3 generations to finish. This is the long game. Every pottery shard found in the dirt, every rusted sword, and every faint line of a forgotten script is a message in a bottle sent through time. They are saying, I was here. I felt the sun on my face. I loved, I feared, and I dreamed. The true legacy of Rome isn't its walls. It's the law. The legacy of Greece isn't the marble. It's the question. The legacy of the East isn't the silk. It's the harmony. The narrator's voice will soon fade, but the echo of 5,000 years remains. You, the listener, are the current steward of this anthology. The baton has been passed from the scribe in Ur, to the philosopher in Athens, to the monk in a cold cell, and now to you. We live in a world of glass and silicon, but we are powered by the same fire that kept the cavemen warm. As you go back to your life, remember the silence of the Sphinx and the wisdom of the Vedas. Remember that you are part of a continuous, unbroken chain of dreamers. The Ancient Civilizations Anthology is not a book that is finished. It is a book that you are writing today. The end of our journey is merely the beginning of your contribution to the grand story of humanity. Walk with the courage of the Vikings, the wisdom of the pharaohs, and the curiosity of the explorers. The stars are waiting, history is watching, and the earth remembers everything. To understand how the ancients lived, we must first look at how they died. For the ancients, death was not an exit, but a grand entrance into another room. Imagine the catacombs of Rome, a dark, subterranean labyrinth stretching for hundreds of miles beneath the city streets. thousands of niches carved into the soft volcanic rock, holding the remains of the early Christians who worshipped in secret. The air is cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of earth. This was an underground city of the dead, where the living came to remember that life is fleeting. But move your mind across the ocean to the high plateau of Peru, where the Paracas people didn't just bury their dead, they transformed them. They wrapped their ancestors in layers of the finest embroidered textiles, placing them in a fetal position inside baskets, creating mummy bundles that were kept in dry desert caverns. These ancestors remained part of the family, consulted for advice and brought out for festivals. In these cultures, the border between the living and the dead was as thin as a veil. Now consider the terracotta army of China once more. But this time look at the Mercury rivers. Legends say that beneath the burial mound of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, lies a miniature world where the Yangtze and Yellow rivers are recreated using flowing liquid mercury, fueled by mechanical pumps. The ceiling is a map of the stars made of pearls and diamonds. It is a tomb designed to be a functional universe for the afterlife. This obsession with preserving the physical body led to the most advanced chemistry of the time. The Egyptians used natron salt and resin. The Chinchorro of Chile used clay and sticks to rebuild the skeleton. Why this obsession? Because to the ancients, as long as the body existed, the soul had a home. When we look at these tombs, we aren't looking at a cult of death. We are looking at a desperate, beautiful love for life. Let us step away from the temples and into the smoke-filled kitchens of the past. If you were a Roman citizen in the year 100 CE, your day didn't begin with a grand feast, but with pulse, a thick, gritty porridge made of emmer wheat. But if you were invited to a banquet at a senator's house, the world changed. Imagine a table overflowing with dormice glazed in honey, flamingo tongues, and garum, a fermented fish sauce so pungent it was banned from being produced near city centers. The Romans didn't just eat, they performed. They reclined on couches, eating with their hands, while poets recited verses and slaves brought silver bowls of scented water to wash away the grease. Wine was never drunk straight. It was mixed with water, honey, and spices. To drink undiluted wine was considered a mark of a barbarian. In the Americas, the kitchen was the domain of the three sisters: maize, beans, and squash. This was a nutritional miracle. Maize provided carbohydrates, beans provided protein and nitrogen to the soil, and squash kept the weeds away. In the Aztec markets, you could smell the first chocolatl, a bitter, spicy drink made of cacao beans, chili peppers, and vanilla. It was a drink for warriors and kings, believed to give divine strength. In China, the Han Dynasty perfected the art of the noodle and the steamed bun, using the energy of the earth to feed millions. And in the villages of Mesopotamia, the first breweries were born. Beer was so essential to life in Sumer that it had its own goddess, Ninkasi. It wasn't just a drink, it was liquid bread, safer to drink than the river water and filled with essential nutrients. These flavors, the salt of the sea, the spice of the jungle, and the sweetness of the honey, are the invisible threads that connect our palates to the very first humans who sat around a fire. Imagine holding a stone that contains the secrets of an entire empire, but you cannot read a single word. This is the tragedy of the undeciphered scripts. The Indus Valley script, carved onto thousands of tiny soapstone seals, remains a silent mystery. We see the pictures of bulls, elephants, and strange symbols, but we have no Rosetta Stone to unlock them. Are they names? Are they prayers? Or are they simple tax records? Then there is the Rongo Rongo of Easter Island. Wooden tablets covered in glyphs that look like dancing birds and humans. When the missionaries arrived, most of these tablets were burned, and the knowledge of how to read them died with the last elders. Every time a language dies, a way of seeing the world vanishes forever. This hour is a tribute to the silence, to the stories that were never told, the poems that were never read, and the voices that were swallowed by time. Imagine walking through the sun-drenched halls of a temple of Asclepius in ancient Greece, where the air is thick with the scent of burning laurel leaves and frankincense. To understand the ancient world, we must understand how they fought the invisible enemies of disease and pain. Medicine was not just a science, it was a desperate dance between the divine and the physical. In ancient Egypt, surgeons were already performing delicate brain surgeries, trepanation, using flint blades that were sharper than modern steel, while their priests applied honey to wounds, unknowingly using the world's first natural antibiotic. They believed that the body was a network of channels much like the Nile, and if those channels were blocked, the person fell ill. Move your mind to the ancient forests of India, where the Ayurveda was being compiled. Here, healers understood that the mind and body were one, using turmeric, ashwagandha, and thousands of other herbs to balance the doshas. They were the first to perform plastic surgery, rebuilding noses lost in battle using flaps of skin from the forehead. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets of Rome, the great physician Galen was dissecting animals to map the human nervous system, creating a medical textbook that would remain the undisputed authority for over 1,500 years. Yet, for all their genius, they also believed in humors. The idea that our emotions and health were dictated by the balance of blood, phlegm, and bile. They lived in a world where a simple scratch could be fatal, yet they possessed a profound knowledge of the natural world that we are only now beginning to rediscover in our modern laboratories. This was a time when a doctor was also a philosopher, a priest, and a botanist, all rolled into one, fighting a war against death with nothing but herbs, prayer, and an indomitable spirit of observation. To understand the soul of a civilization, you must look at how it plays. In the ancient world, sports were never just games. They were rituals of life and death, displays of imperial power, and sacrifices to the gods. Imagine standing in the center of the Colosseum in Rome, the Flavian amphitheater, where 50,000 voices are screaming in a synchronized bloodlust. The floor beneath you is covered in sand to soak up the crimson tide of the morning's executions. You hear the rhythmic clanking of armor as the gladiators, the superstars of the underworld, step into the light. These men, often slaves or prisoners, fought not for gold, but for the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolized their freedom. Above them, the emperor sat in a box of marble, holding the power of life and death in a single thumb's gesture. But now, travel across the ocean to the humid jungles of the Yucatan, where the Maya are playing pits, the great ball game. This was no ordinary sport. The players could not use their hands or feet. They had to keep a heavy, solid rubber ball in the air using only their hips and elbows. The ball represented the sun moving through the underworld, and the stakes were cosmic. In some ceremonies, the losing captain, or perhaps the winner as a mark of ultimate honor, was sacrificed to ensure the rains would come and the corn would grow. Across the world in the plains of Olympia, the Greeks were stripping naked to compete in the first Olympic Games, believing that a perfect body was a reflection of a perfect soul. They would sprint, wrestle, and throw the discus under the watchful eye of a colossal statue of Zeus, pausing all wars for a sacred truce. Whether it was the roar of the Roman crowd or the rhythmic chanting of the Maya, these spectacles served a dark but vital purpose. They channeled the violence of humanity into a controlled ritual, turning the arena into a mirror where society could watch its own glory and its own cruelty play out in the dust. Imagine standing on the limestone docks of Carthage or the great harbor of Alexandria, where the air is a thick cocktail of salt, cedar wood, and the screams of thousand-man crews. To understand the ancient world, you must realize that the ocean was the first internet, a high-speed highway that connected minds, religions, and armies. The engineering of the sea was a cold, calculated science. Imagine the trireme, the apex predator of the Mediterranean. This was not just a boat, it was a human-powered missile. Picture 3 tiers of oarsmen, their muscles glistening with sweat in the dark, cramped hulls, pulling in perfect rhythmic unison to propel a bronze-tipped ram into the side of an enemy vessel. The sound of splintering wood and the desperate cries of sailors sinking into the wine-dark sea were the background music of the ancient world. But naval power wasn't just about war. It was about the impossible scale of logistics. How did the Romans transport obelisks weighing hundreds of tons from the heart of Egypt to the piazzas of Rome? They built obelisk ships, massive wide-bellied giants filled with lentils to cushion the stone and keep it from shifting during the treacherous crossing of the Mediterranean. Further east in the Indian Ocean, the Austronesian sailors were perfecting the outrigger canoe, a design so stable it allowed them to colonize Madagascar and Hawaii, navigating by the feeling of the waves and the flight paths of birds. From the fireships of the Byzantines, which sprayed a mysterious, unquenchable Greek fire across the water, to the treasure fleets of the Chinese Ming dynasty with ships 4 times the size of anything in Europe, the ancient navy was the ultimate test of human ingenuity. It was a world where a single storm could bankrupt an empire. Yet the call of the horizon was so loud that men never stopped building bigger, faster, and more terrifying monsters of the deep. History has long been written as a story of kings, but if you peel back the layers of dust, you find that the ancient world was often steered by the invisible hands and iron wills of women who refused to be forgotten. Imagine the throne room of Palmyra in the 3rd century, where Queen Zenobia challenged the entire might of the Roman Empire, carving out her own kingdom from the sands of Syria, and leading her armies on horseback like a desert lioness. She was a scholar of 5 languages and a tactician who saw the cracks in the Roman eagle's wings. But power wasn't always found on a battlefield. Often, it was whispered in the corridors of the palace. In the Han Dynasty of China, Empress Lu Ji rose from a commoner to the supreme ruler, navigating a deadly court of eunuchs and rivals with a calculated ruthlessness that kept the empire stable for decades. In the heart of the Americas, the Mayan Lady Sixsky of Naranjo was a warrior queen who personally led ritual sacrifices and military campaigns to restore her family's glory, her name carved in stone as a Kalumt, a supreme warlord. And what of the common woman? In the markets of Mesopotamia, women were the primary brewers of beer and the keepers of the taverns, protected by some of the earliest laws of property and divorce. From the Vestal Virgins of Rome, who held the spiritual life of the city in their hands, to the female pharaohs who wore the false beard of Osiris, women in antiquity were not merely observers of history. They were its architects, its poets, and its fiercest defenders. They lived in societies that often tried to silence them, yet their voices echo through the centuries in the beauty of their jewelry, the wisdom of their letters, and the undeniable power of the empires they helped build and sometimes helped destroy. How did a world without electricity, hydraulics, or computer-aided design move mountains and shape stone with the precision of a laser? This is the haunting question that echoes through the halls of history. Imagine standing at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza, staring up at 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, fitted together so tightly that you cannot slide a single strand of hair between them. This wasn't just brute force. It was a symphony of mathematics. The architects of Egypt aligned the pyramids to true north with an accuracy that baffles modern surveyors, using nothing but the stars and water-filled trenches to level the ground. But the mystery deepens as we travel to Baalbek in Lebanon, where 3 stones known as the trilithon, each weighing over 800 tons, were lifted onto a wall 20 feet high. Even today, only a handful of the world's largest cranes could move such a weight. Further east in the Ellora caves of India, an entire cathedral, the Kailasa temple, was carved not by building upward, but by cutting downward into a single solid basalt cliff. 400,000 tons of rock were removed with nothing but hammers and chisels to reveal a 3-story temple covered in intricate sculptures. The ancients didn't just build structures. They manipulated the very crust of the earth. They understood the resonant frequencies of stone, the structural integrity of the arch, and the thermal properties of limestone. From the Roman aqueducts that used a slope of only a few inches per mile to carry water across vast valleys, to the acoustic perfection of the Greek theaters where a whisper on stage could be heard in the back row, ancient engineering was a testament to the fact that when human genius is pushed by necessity and faith, the impossible becomes permanent. Deep beneath the rolling hills of Cappadocia in modern-day Turkey, there is a secret that remained hidden for centuries. Imagine a man in 1963 knocking down a wall in his basement, only to find a tunnel that led into a subterranean metropolis. Derinkuyu. This was not a mere cave. It was a multi-level city carved 18 stories deep into the soft volcanic ash. It could house 20,000 people, complete with ventilation shafts that reached the surface, oil lamp niches, wineries, stables, and even schools. Why would an entire civilization choose to live in the dark? These cities were the ultimate bunkers of the ancient world, designed with massive, circular stone doors that could only be opened from the inside, protecting the inhabitants from invading armies and the harsh elements. But the phenomenon of the underground world wasn't limited to Turkey. In the Lus Plateau of China, millions of people lived in yaodongs, earth dwellings carved into the hillsides that provided natural insulation against the freezing winters and scorching summers. In the salt mines of Wieliczka in Poland, miners spent their entire lives underground, carving grand chapels and statues out of solid salt. These subterranean worlds represent a different side of the human spirit, not the desire to reach for the heavens with towers, but the instinct to find sanctuary in the womb of the earth. They teach us that civilization is not always what we see on the horizon. Sometimes the most complex stories are buried beneath our feet, waiting in the silence of the stone to be rediscovered. Imagine a world where a single bag of peppercorns was worth more than a man's life, and a bolt of blue silk could buy a small village. To understand the ancient world, you must follow the invisible lines that crisscross the planet, the great trade routes. Before the age of steam and silicon, the world was connected by the slow, rhythmic footsteps of camels and the creaking of wooden hulls. The Silk Road was never a single path. It was a sprawling, thousand-headed serpent of trade that stretched from the neon-bright markets of Chang'an in China to the marble forums of Rome. Travelers didn't just carry silk and jade. They carried the Black Death, the secrets of papermaking, and the stories of the Buddha. But south of the Silk Road lay an even more treacherous journey, the incense route. Imagine a caravan of 3,000 camels moving through the scorching Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Arabia. They were carrying frankincense and myrrh, resins harvested from stunted trees that were more valuable than gold because they were required for the funeral pyres of emperors and the altars of gods. Further east, the maritime spice route turned the Indian Ocean into a global highway. Sailors from the Roman world and the Han dynasty met in the ports of southern India to trade Mediterranean wine and glass for Malabar pepper and Ceylonese cinnamon. This trade created a globalized antiquity, where a woman in Britain could wear a necklace made of Baltic amber, Egyptian emeralds, and Indian pearls. It was a world of high stakes and high rewards, where a single successful voyage could make a merchant a king, and a single shipwreck could ruin a dynasty. These routes were the first true neural networks of humanity, proving that even in an age of swords and sandals, our hunger for the exotic and the new was an unstoppable force of nature. Long before the modern laboratory, the human mind was already dissecting the elements, trying to turn lead into gold and mortality into eternal life. This was the era of alchemy, the grandfather of chemistry. Imagine the Library of Alexandria, where Greek logic met Egyptian mysticism. Here, early scientists like Zosimos of Panopolis were experimenting with distillation and sublimation, using bronze apparatuses to extract the essence of metals. They weren't just looking for wealth. They were looking for the logos, the underlying code of the universe. In ancient China, Taoist alchemists searching for the elixir of life accidentally stumbled upon a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. They didn't find immortality. They found gunpowder, a fire medicine that would eventually change the face of warfare and collapse the walls of empires. But the ancient genius extended into the invisible world of mathematics and physics. Consider the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where Al-Khwarizmi developed the foundations of algebra, a word derived from aljaber, meaning the restoration of broken parts. While Europe was in a deep intellectual slumber, Islamic scholars were measuring the circumference of the earth, refining the astrolabe for celestial navigation, and building the first hospitals with separate wards for different diseases. They understood that light traveled in straight lines, laid the groundwork for optics, and realized that the pulse was a key to the heart's health. Ancient science was a tapestry of trial and error, a world where magic and logic were not yet enemies. It teaches us that the modern world is merely a standing on the shoulders of giants who worked by candlelight, squinting at symbols and stirring bubbling cauldrons to find the truth about the world we inhabit. Grand Finale. Chapter 38. The Paradox of Steel, the Evolution of War and the Dream of Peace. English script. To look at the map of the ancient world is to look at a tapestry of blood and iron. For 3 hours we have walked through the ruins of empires that rose on the strength of their swords. But the evolution of warfare was not just about killing. It was the ultimate driver of human technology. Imagine the transition from the bronze daggers of Sumer to the ironclad phalanxes of Alexander the Great. Each new weapon was a problem that needed a defensive solution, leading to the invention of the stone catapult, the crossbow, and the high-walled fortress. We see the chariot, the ancient tank, rushing across the plains of Kadesh, and the Greek fire burning on the waves of the Bosporus. But as the weapons grew more terrifying, humanity began to hunger for a counterbalance: the concept of universal peace. It was in the aftermath of the bloodiest battles that the greatest philosophical leaps were made. Think of King Ashoka of India, who, after witnessing the carnage of the Kalinga War, stood amongst the bodies of the fallen and felt a profound, soul-crushing regret. He didn't just stop fighting. He turned his entire empire into a sanctuary of non-violence, carving his edicts of peace onto pillars of stone that still stand today. Or consider the Pax Romana, a 200-year period where, for the first time, a person could travel from Britain to Egypt without crossing a single hostile border. This paradox defines us. We are a species that dreams of the stars while building walls, a species that invents the most efficient ways to destroy life, only to realize that our true strength lies in our ability to protect it. War gave us the road and the bridge, but it was the silence of peace that allowed us to build the library and the school. And so our clock has finally run its course. 3 hours have passed, a mere blink in the eye of deep time, yet we have traveled across continents and through the minds of millions who are now but dust and memory. We started in the mud-brick cities of Mesopotamia and ended in the silent, stargazing observatories of the Maya. We have seen that there is no such thing as a primitive human. The person who carved a bone flute 30,000 years ago felt the same loneliness you feel. The mother in Pompeii who shielded her child from the falling ash felt the same love you feel. The architect who calculated the angle of the sun in Giza possessed the same genius you possess. We are not a collection of separate civilizations. We are a single, continuous experiment in consciousness. Every piece of plastic in our oceans is a descendant of the first clay pot. Every satellite in our orbit is a descendant of the first stone thrown at the sky. We are the inheritors of their failures and the guardians of their dreams. The ruins we have explored are not graveyards. They are mirrors. They show us that we are fragile, yes, but we are also persistent beyond measure. As the silence returns, let it not be an empty silence, but one filled with the echoes of the ancestors. The anthology of the ancient world does not end with this voice. It continues with you. In the questions you ask, the beauty you create, and the world you choose to leave behind for those who will look back at us and call us ancient. To truly feel the passage of 3 hours, we must stop looking at monuments and start looking at the people. Imagine the sensory overload of a street in Rome or Alexandria at high noon. It wasn't the silent white marble world we see in museums. It was a riot of color and noise. The walls were covered in bright red and yellow graffiti, political slogans, declarations of love, and even complaints about bad wine. Imagine the smell. a mixture of expensive incense from the temples, roasting meat from street-side stalls called thermopolia, and the pungent stench of open drains. This was the first time in human history that strangers lived packed together by the hundreds of thousands. In the insulae, the cramped apartment blocks of Rome, families lived in rooms no bigger than a modern closet, constantly fearing the two greatest threats of urban life, fire and collapse. But there was also a profound sense of community. Men gathered in the public baths not just to wash, but to debate philosophy, hear the latest news from the Germanic frontiers, and cut business deals. In the markets of the Han Dynasty, you would hear the rhythmic clacking of bamboo tally sticks, as merchants calculated profits. Children played with clay dolls and wooden swords in the shadows of temples, while poets recited their latest verses in the hope of catching a patron's ear. This was the urban heartbeat, a frantic, dirty, beautiful struggle that proves that despite our technology, the way we live, laugh, and complain about our neighbors has remained unchanged for 2 millennia. But history is also written by the hand of nature, and sometimes that hand is cruel. To reach our final milestone, we must witness the moments when the earth itself decided the fate of empires. Imagine the year 79 CE, in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. For days the earth had groaned, but the people of Pompeii and Herculaneum continued their lives, unaware that they were living on a ticking time bomb. When the mountain finally exploded, it didn't just rain ash. It sent a pyroclastic surge, a 1,000-degree cloud of gas and rock, racing down the slopes at hundreds of miles per hour. In an instant, time stopped. A baker's bread was left in the oven. A dog was left chained in a courtyard. A mother held her child for the last time. These victims were frozen in ash, creating a haunting time capsule that allows us to walk through their streets today. But Vesuvius was not alone. Think of the 365 CE Crete earthquake, which triggered a tsunami so massive it flung ships onto the rooftops of Alexandria, thousands of miles away. Or the mysterious volcanic winter of 536 CE, where the sun was dimmed for 18 months, causing crops to fail from Ireland to China and triggering the Justinian plague. These disasters remind us of our fragility. They show us that civilization is a delicate agreement with the planet. When the climate shifts or the earth trembles, the mightiest walls of stone are revealed to be as thin as paper. Yet, even in the wake of such destruction, humanity survived, rebuilt, and continued to tell the story of what it means to endure. As the final minutes of our 3-hour journey tick away, we must ask, what have we learned from this long walk through time? We have seen that gold fades, steel rusts, and empires fall. But the spirit of curiosity, the fire that drove the first sailor across the sea and the first scribe to pick up a reed, is immortal. You are the latest link in a chain that stretches back to the very dawn of time. Your thoughts, your struggles, and your dreams are the echoes of those who came before you. As this anthology concludes, let the weight of these 3 hours settle into your mind. You are not just a spectator of history. You are its living, breathing result. The story of the ancient world is not finished. It is waiting for its next chapter. And that chapter starts with you. As we linger in these final chapters, we encounter a mystery that spans every ocean and every mountain range. The strange similarity of our stories. Why is it that the Maya in the jungles of Mexico, the Sumerians in the deserts of Iraq, and the Hindus in the valleys of India all tell the story of a great flood? Why do we find the image of the world tree, a cosmic pillar connecting heaven and earth, in the mythology of the Vikings, the Siberians, and the Aztecs alike? This hour explores the idea of the collective unconscious. It suggests that the ancient world wasn't just connected by trade routes, but by the very structure of the human mind. Imagine a storyteller 3,000 years ago sitting by a fire in a cold European cave, and another sitting under a baobab tree in the African savanna. Both are telling stories of a hero who must descend into the underworld to find a lost treasure or a lost soul. This hero's journey is the psychological DNA of our species. We created monsters like the Hydra and the Quetzalcoatl to represent the chaos of nature, and we created gods of thunder and sun to represent the order we craved. These myths weren't just fairy tales. They were the first maps of the human psyche. They were our way of explaining the unexplainable, the changing of seasons, the mystery of death, and the fire of consciousness. In this final stretch of our journey, we realize that while the languages of the ancient world were many, the heart of the story was always one. We have always been a species searching for meaning in the stars, trying to find our place in a universe that is both terrifyingly vast and hauntingly beautiful. Before we finally close this 3-hour anthology, we must address the most important relationship of all: the bond between the ancients and the earth. In our modern world, we look at nature as a resource to be extracted. The ancients looked at nature as a parent to be respected. Imagine the sacred groves of the Celts or the hanging gardens of the East. To the ancients, every river had a spirit, and every mountain had a memory. In ancient Japan, the Shinto faith taught that the kami, the divine, lived in the wind and the rocks. In Egypt, the dung beetle was not a pest, but a symbol of the sun's rebirth. This wasn't just superstition, it was a survival strategy. They understood that if you overfish the sea or overfarm the soil, the gods, nature itself, would punish you with famine. The Nabateans of Petra mastered the art of water harvesting in the middle of a parched desert, building hidden cisterns that allowed a city of 30,000 to thrive where today a single man would die of thirst. The Anasazi built their homes into the cliffs to stay cool in the sun and warm in the frost. They didn't fight the climate, they danced with it. As we reach the end of our time together, this is perhaps the most urgent lesson the ancient world has to offer us. We have the technology to move mountains, but we have lost the wisdom to listen to them. The ancients remind us that we are not on this earth, but of it. Their ruins are a testament to what happens when we lose that balance, and their achievements are a blueprint for how we might one day find it again. And now the journey is truly complete. For 180 minutes you have lived in the past. You have breathed the air of the Nile, felt the dust of the Silk Road, and heard the roar of the Roman crowds. This is the power of the anthology. It collapses time. It proves that the dead are never truly gone as long as we speak their names. The gold may have tarnished, and the temples may have crumbled into sand, but the ideas, the science, the art, the law, and the love remain. You are now a walking museum of human history. Carry these stories with you. Let the resilience of the ancients be your strength, and their curiosity be your guide. The sun sets on the ancient world, only to rise on the one you are building now. For the final time, thank you for traveling through time with us. The past is present. The story continues. Throughout these 3 hours we have seen the stones and the steel, but what did the ancient world sound like? Close your eyes and imagine the silence of a world without engines or electricity. In that silence, sound was sacred. Imagine the great pipes of Pan, echoing through the Greek mountains, or the deep vibrating hum of a Mayan conch shell calling an entire city to prayer. The ancients understood acoustics in a way we are only now beginning to grasp. In the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a subterranean temple carved 5,000 years ago, there is a specific chamber known as the oracle room. If a man speaks in a low voice there, the sound resonates at a frequency of 110 Hz, a frequency that modern neuroscience has shown can shift the human brain into a state of deep meditation or trance. Were the ancients using sound as a form of medicine or spiritual enlightenment? From the bone flutes of the Ice Age to the massive bronze bells of the Zhou dynasty in China, which were tuned with mathematical precision to play a perfect scale, music was the bridge between the human and the divine. They didn't just play music. They believed that the entire universe was a musica universalis, a harmony of the spheres. This hour explores how the rhythmic beating of a shaman's drum in the Siberian tundra and the complex chants of Vedic priests in India were the first attempts to harmonize human life with the vibration of the cosmos. Sound was the first invisible architecture, building cathedrals in the mind long before we built them out of stone. As we approach the absolute finality of our journey, we must recognize that the ancients were not just looking at their past. They were obsessed with our future. They were the original long-term thinkers. Imagine a Maya astronomer priest calculating a calendar that stretches millions of years into the future, or the builders of the Great Wall who knew they would never see it finished in their lifetime. They lived for the great time. They believed that we are all part of a cycle, the yugas of the Hindus, the great years of the Greeks. They saw time as a wheel, not a line. This gave them a perspective that we, in our fast-paced modern world, have largely lost. They built for eternity. When an Egyptian architect designed a tomb, he wasn't thinking about the next decade. He was thinking about the next 10,000 years. This legacy mindset is the greatest treasure they have left for us. It challenges us to ask, what are we building today that will be worth remembering in 5 millennia? Are we leaving behind monuments of wisdom or mountains of waste? The ancients were the keepers of the flame, passing it through the darkness of collapses, wars, and famines so that it could eventually reach us. This final hour is a tribute to that endurance. It is a call to look beyond our own brief lives and see ourselves as part of the same grand, ancient, and eternal story. The narrator's voice has journeyed through the dust of Sumer, the gold of Mali, and the ice of the north. We have reached the edge of the map. 3 hours of human glory, tragedy, and genius are now etched into your memory. As the final seconds fade, take one last breath of the ancient world. The ancestors are not gone. They are waiting in the architecture of your laws, the rhythm of your music, and the very structure of your thoughts. The anthology is complete. The cycle is closed. From the first spark of fire to the stars above, history is you. Goodbye, traveler, until the wheel turns again. Throughout these 3 hours we have seen the stones and the steel. But what did the ancient world sound like? Close your eyes and imagine the silence of a world without engines or electricity. In that silence, sound was sacred. Imagine the great pipes of Pan, echoing through the Greek mountains, or the deep vibrating hum of a Mayan conch shell calling an entire city to prayer. The ancients understood acoustics in a way we are only now beginning to grasp. In the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a subterranean temple carved 5,000 years ago, there is a specific chamber known as the oracle room. If a man speaks in a low voice there, the sound resonates at a frequency of 110 Hz. A frequency that modern neuroscience has shown can shift the human brain into a state of deep meditation or trance. Were the ancients using sound as a form of medicine or spiritual enlightenment? From the bone flutes of the Ice Age to the massive bronze bells of the Zhou dynasty in China, which were tuned with mathematical precision to play a perfect scale, music was the bridge between the human and the divine. They didn't just play music. They believed that the entire universe was a musica universalis, a harmony of the spheres. This hour explores how the rhythmic beating of a shaman's drum in the Siberian tundra and the complex chants of Vedic priests in India were the first attempts to harmonize human life with the vibration of the cosmos. Sound was the first invisible architecture, building cathedrals in the mind long before we built them out of stone. As we approach the absolute finality of our journey, we must recognize that the ancients were not just looking at their past. They were obsessed with our future. They were the original long-term thinkers. Imagine a Maya astronomer priest calculating a calendar that stretches millions of years into the future, or the builders of the Great Wall who knew they would never see it finished in their lifetime. They lived for the great time. They believed that we are all part of a cycle, the yugas of the Hindus, the great years of the Greeks. They saw time as a wheel, not a line. This gave them a perspective that we, in our fast-paced modern world, have largely lost. They built for eternity. When an Egyptian architect designed a tomb, he wasn't thinking about the next decade. He was thinking about the next 10,000 years. This legacy mindset is the greatest treasure they have left for us. It challenges us to ask, What are we building today that will be worth remembering in 5 millennia? Are we leaving behind monuments of wisdom or mountains of waste? The ancients were the keepers of the flame, passing it through the darkness of collapses, wars, and famines so that it could eventually reach us. This final hour is a tribute to that endurance. It is a call to look beyond our own brief lives and see ourselves as part of the same grand, ancient, and eternal story. The narrator's voice has journeyed through the dust of Sumer, the gold of Mali, and the ice of the north. We have reached the edge of the map. 3 hours of human glory, tragedy, and genius are now etched into your memory. As the final seconds fade, take one last breath of the ancient world. The ancestors are not gone. They are waiting in the architecture of your laws, the rhythm of your music, and the very structure of your thoughts. The anthology is complete. The cycle is closed. From the first spark of fire to the stars above, history is you. Goodbye, traveler, until the wheel turns again.